Hello. So, this week we are talking about Parashat Hukat. Parashat Hukat has several interesting issues. This is, after this point, we are basically past the 40 years that were announced about in two parshas ago in Parashat Shlach. And this is also where the very famous event happens where Moshe and Aaron get punished that they will not enter the land of Israel. So the story, as most of you, or all of you know, is that the people of Israel were thirsty because Miriam, Moshe's sister, passed away, and when she passed away, also the well, which miraculously was attached to her existence, had disappeared. They didn't have any water, and therefore they came and complained, "We don't have any water. We're going to die in the desert." When that happened, so Moshe and Aaron were told to speak to a rock and say that it should bring forth water. And instead, Moshe cried out a criticism, point of criticizing the people of Israel, and struck the rock instead of talking to it. Water gushed out. People of Israel got water, but Hashem was upset, and he criticizes Moshe and Aaron and says, "Yan lohem man tebi lakdisheni," because you did not believe in me to make me holy, whatever that may mean. You will not come to the land of Israel. Okay, this is where this punishment is given to them. Now, there's been a lot of interpretation, a lot of explanation as to what exactly was the nature of the sin. We are not going to go into that today. But what's interesting is that we have a very different account for Moshe and Aaron's verdict in Sefer Dvarim. So as you know, in Sefer Dvarim, in Deuteronomy, there's a recounting of Moshe of some of the main milestones that took place during the time in the desert. And in that recounting, Moshe relates his punishment to a very different story. It says there in Perek Aleph, chapter 1, verse Lamed Zayin, so verse 37, after Moshe tells the story of the spies that we just heard about in Parashat Shlach, he says, "Gam bi hitanaf Hashem biglalchem, le'emor gam ata lo tavo sham. Yoshua bin Nun ha'omed lefanecha, hu yavo shama. Oto chazek, ki hu yanachilena et Yisrael." So, in the story over there, it says that God told that God got upset at Moshe because of the people of Israel. Hitanaf bi biglalchem, because of you. Le'emor gam ata lo tavo sham. That Moshe's punishment actually took place, the announcing of his punishment, the verdict, actually took place 38 years ago or 40 years ago, when the story of Parashat Shlach took place, and after the spies came back and said what they said, and they were punished to die in the desert. So Moshe says, because of you, I also was punished, and that Yoshua bin Nun is the one who's going to bring in the people of Israel. Now this is very strange, because in the story in Parashat Shlach, we don't see Moshe sinning, and we don't see any account of this punishment occurring then. And the commentators on Sefer Dvarim point this out, and they explain that it's more of an association in terms of like the general nature of the way the people of Israel behave, and what that causes, and how that brought about, just like what happened then, brought about the people of Israel not getting into Israel. So did this last event arise out of their behavior, causing Moshe to sin, whatever that sin may be, and not to go into Israel. And one could also perhaps argue that if they hadn't sinned then, and there wasn't this delay of 40 years, then this whole story with the rock and the water would never have come to be, and so in some way, like you can say that that's because of that. But still, this tension exists between these two recountings of the story. And today we're not going to resolve that tension, though there are, I'm sure you can find online several explanations as to why, as to sort of explaining this discrepancy. What I do want to do is explain through this recounting in Dvarim what a midrash in our parsha is trying to say. Okay, so the following midrash clearly takes the position and the perspective of Dvarim as to why Moshe was punished. So here's what the midrash says. This is as usual the Tanchuma in Parashat Hukat. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe. God said to Moshe, Moshe, באיזה פנים אתה מבקש לבוא לארץ? In what face do you want to enter the land? Meaning, in what kind of honor do you want to be able to enter? Your face held high? Your head held high? משל למה הדבר דומה? What is this like? לרועה אחד שיצא לראות צאנו של מלך. For a shepherd that went out to shepherd the flock of the king. ונשבת הצאן, and the flock of sheep was captured. It was captured by thieves. ביקש הרועה להיכנס לפלטרין של מלך. So the shepherd, lacking a job, asked to enter, went back and wanted to enter the castle. אמר לו המלך, יאמרו שאתה השבית הצאן? The king said to him, they'll say that you are the one who lost the king's flock. Meaning, it will be a great dishonor for you. You'll be there in the king's court, and everyone's going to point at you, saying, "Look, there's a guy that lost the king's flock of sheep." אף כך אמר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא למשה. In a similar way, God told Moshe, "שבחך הוא שהוצאת 60 ריבו וקברתם במדבר, ואתה מכניס דור אחר?" Is your great call for fame, great call for fame that you are the one who took out 600,000 people and left them to die in the desert, and then you just moved on and walked into Israel, bringing in a different generation? עכשיו יאמרו, אין למתי מדבר חלק לעולם הבא. People will say they have no room in the world to come, meaning they're just a bunch of sinners who don't deserve any right. אלא תהיה בצידן ותבוא עמהם. Be at their side and come in and come with them. שנאמר ויתר ראשיים, לכך נאמר לא תביאו את הקהל הזה, אלא שיצא עמך. So it's quoting the verse that it says in our parsha where it says, לא תביאו את הקהל הזה, meaning God's punishment for Moshe is that they will not bring this cohort, this people, אלא שיצא עמך. Meaning this means the people that are after the 40 years. So this is the second generation. You won't bring this cohort, you'll bring the previous one. Right? The one that left with you. Yeah, that's the Midrash. So first of all, as I said, this Midrash is clearly taking the position that Moshe's punishment in this Parsha has almost nothing to do with the sin of this water. Or the sin of this water may somehow be related to earlier sin that happened almost 40 years earlier, the sin of the spies. But it's interpreting the verse in Dvarim, I think, in a very nice way. The verse there again said, "Gam bihit anaf Hashem biglalchem." Right? God got upset at me because of you. Moshe is pointing the finger at the people of Israel. And I think that it's trying to say, yes, Moshe couldn't go in because of them, right? It's true that in this, like in other words, we don't necessarily get a sense of anger in this midrash, but the relationship is clear. It's saying, it's not you, Moshe, it's that the people of Israel can't go in, or those from the previous generation, and so should you not go in, right? And so it's taking that perspective that we saw in the previous, in the other source, in the parsha, in Parashat Dvarim. Okay, so that we understand. And what is the reason? So why is it that because of the sin of the spies, Moshe can't get in? So, like at first glance, it's just saying, Moshe, is this going to be your legacy, right? Do you want to be the one who just left 600,000 people to die, and really it's more like 3 million, but let's say 600,000 people above 20, between 20 and 60 to die? Is that really how you want to be remembered? Right, that's what he's saying. They'll it's about the saving face. Yeah, it's about saving face. So, we need to first of all understand: is it just saving face, and how does him dying save face? I mean, I think we understand at least intuitively that by somehow going down with a ship, right? Moshe is making a sacrifice. So maybe that's a bit more poetic. But what is really the meaning of this thing? So I think there are two perspectives to this, or two angles that we need to attack this to get the best understanding of what this is saying, which I think is a beautiful idea in this midrash. First of all, I think it's a time that we remember what happened in the sin of the spies. When the people of Israel sinned and sort of began to follow the direction that the ten Nesiim tried to point them in, and which of course was wrong on their part to do, Moshe, as usual, tries to argue in their favor and to protect them, to ask God to forgive them and to not destroy them on the spot. What does he say? He doesn't say, oh, Hashem. He doesn't stop by saying, oh, Hashem, please forgive them. He also says to Hashem, over here, he says, ושמעו מצרים, כי העלית בכוחך את העם הזה מקרבו ואמרו, אל יושב הארץ הזאת, שמעו, כי אתה השם בקרב העם הזה, אשר עין בעין נראה, אתה השם ועננך עומד עליהם, ובענון ענן אתה הולך לפניהם ובעמוד האש ולילה, ומתה את העם הזה כאיש אחד. So if, everybody hears what you did, they'll say, אם בלתי יכולת השם להביא את העם הזה אל הארץ, אשר נשבע להם וישחטם במדבר. That God was not powerful enough to bring them into the land of Israel, so he killed them in the desert. Okay? In other words, what is Moshe saying? He's saying exactly what Hashem is saying to Moshe now. Right? Moshe's argument then was to say, what kind of honor is this for you, Hashem? That you brought out the people of Israel, but then left them to die in the desert? And so one of the things the Midrash is doing here is turning that argument on Moshe and saying, and you, Moshe, what have you done? Right? True. I couldn't kill them off immediately, but when I measured on the scale of, this is what God is saying, I may have measured on the scales of eons, of generations. I brought in this people. It took them another 40 years. It's nothing on the scale for God's, and I brought them into the land of Israel. My honor, says Hashem, is safe. But what about yours? Right? You didn't just bring out the people. You brought out those people. And those people were under your care. And you were not able to bring them in. Is that honorable for you? So first of all, we see over here that when Hashem accepted Moshe's argument at the time, there was, in a sense, a price to pay for Moshe. Well, a price in the sense that he became vulnerable to this kind of argument, right? That someone can come along like Hashem and say, your legacy is something that you need to consider, right? Oh, hello Abigail. Anat, I have Abigail here while I'm doing my MyDrash. Googie, poor you. Anyway, so that's the first thing, right? Which is, I think, a very nice idea. But the truth is that it goes way beyond that, because the question really is then, what is Moshe's legacy, right? And I think that's something we need to understand better from this midrash. For that, we need to go in to the meaning of the actual story, right? The midrash doesn't just say what is Moshe's legacy. It's saying, it's saying that it brings a story of this shepherd, right, who went out with a flock of sheep and lost the flock of sheep, and now he can't come in to the king's castle because it won't sort of be honorable for him. Now, of course, we see the parallel, right? The flock of sheep are the people of Israel, and shepherd is Moshe, and God is the king. Very nice. But this parallel is not just a coincidence. They didn't just choose this specific example or parable by chance, because Moshe is well known as the Ro'eh Ne'eman, the loyal shepherd to God. And the reason he is because there's many places in the Midrash where we see that, God chose a shepherd, after all, to lead the people out of Egypt, right? Moshe is chosen by God when, he's a shepherd for his father-in-law Yitro. And, so it's not just a coincidence that we're choosing an example with a shepherd. This is an example that maybe Moshe could relate to, right? Because he was a shepherd. He would understand this example and understand the logic behind the need to sort of go down with the ship. But I think it goes beyond that. Because there's another famous Midrash. The Midrash tells about how Moshe came to the burning bush. And the story goes that Moshe was herding his sheep, or his father-in-law's sheep. And one sheep got lost. And it was out in the desert and it was going to die if it wasn't found. Moshe ran after it, right? Trying to find it, not giving up, not letting even one sheep wasn't going to get lost. Until he finally found it. When he found it, that's where, God revealed himself with the burning bush, saying, that's the kind of person that I want to lead my people out of Egypt. I'm not looking for a leader, some sort of a statesman. I'm looking for a shepherd. One who will care for every individual, one who will simply, move them from place to place and take them where I point, but who will care for every one of them. And indeed, that's what Moshe was, right? We see how, where at every point, at least until recently where it starts being too hard for him, he really does stand up for the people of Israel, try to protect them, and do whatever needs to be done for them, as much as he can. But remember, right? So here now Hashem says to him, Moshe, that one sheep, you wouldn't give up on that. You went into the desert, ran after him for who knows how long, till you found him. And you're going to leave 600,000 sheep just like that? You're just going to leave them in the desert alone? Remember, the Midrash says, people will say they don't deserve a place in the world to come. Meaning, it's not only about Moshe's honor, it's about their honor. Really? Were they really such a hopeless case? Yes, it's true that they were punished. But was there no potential? No opportunity, perhaps? Maybe it just needed a little bit more care, a little bit more attention, a little bit more, perseverance on your side. Was there truly nothing you could have done? Don't you still have some level of obligation or responsibility towards that generation? And so the Midrash here, and I purposefully didn't emphasize this earlier. Yeah, but the Midrash is actually saying something beyond just to say, go down with the ship. It's saying, go down with the ship so you can come up with it later. Right? The Midrash ends up by saying, Lo taviu et hakahal hazeh, ela sheyatza imcha. Meaning, and it's saying, tiyeh betzidam v'tavoy mahem. The Midrash is implying that sometime in the distant future, you'll be able to bring them into the land of Israel eventually. Meaning, perhaps, let's say, the Midrash doesn't say this explicitly, but probably means to say that when Mashiach comes, and finally we have, the period of resurrection, then Moshe and all the people in the desert, at least those who deserve, will rise up from the grave, and then Moshe will be able to round them all up and bring them back into the land of Israel. He'll be able to actually walk into the land of Israel and complete the mission that he started off with. I think in this way, Moshe is in a very beautiful way, very close to another figure who also died before he was able to complete his mission. That's Eliyahu. The story of Eliyahu, of Elijah the prophet, is very, very well known. There's a lot of parallels between Eliyahu and Moshe, which we won't go into right now, but for those of you who want, there's several classes on this, on MyDrash, that you can find in the audio archive about Eliyahu. Eliyahu and Moshe are very similar. Just to sort of whet your appetite, they both spend 40 days and 40 nights without food and go to Mount Sinai to receive a special revelation from God. There's a lot of similar things. And another similar thing is that they both were not able to complete their mission fully. Eliyahu gives up. Moshe doesn't give up, but he fails, at least with respect to the first generation. Despite both of them being great incredibly great spiritual personas. And Eliyahu doesn't die, right? He's whisked away by a chariot of fire, and is destined to sort of wait with us until it's time for our final redemption, and come and announce it, right? He's attached to us because he left before he finished. At least sort of that's the way that I understand it. And I'm not sure if it's an idea of mine or that I've heard it somewhere. But Eliyahu is there because he never finished. He needs to come back when it's time. And Moshe too. Moshe has unfinished business with the people of Israel. Because the generation that he took out of Egypt, he was supposed to take them all the way and take them into the land of Israel. And he wasn't able to do that. Mostly because they made mistakes, but he was their shepherd. And he has that responsibility towards them. And that responsibility, when God is involved, doesn't end with death. It can still be fulfilled. That responsibility, that promise can still be made good on. And so Moshe is told by Hashem, this is not who you are, Moshe. What is your legacy going to be? That you walked with them and left them there to die, and left them there all alone? Your flock? You're just going to let them wander in the desert like that poor little lamb that you just couldn't let go? Now you're going to let 600,000 of them just be there all by themselves? No. Let me give you one last chance. For them, yes, I know it means you're not going to walk in, and I know that pains you. But you and I both know this is for you also. This is for your legacy, for your to complete what you set out to do. You also need this. And so this midrash, completely ignoring the question about what the meaning of was the sin that we see in our parsha, is taking a very sort of very different and I think very beautiful perspective on Moshe's dying at the entrance of Israel, as if waiting there, saying, "People of Israel, I am here, and when the time comes, I'll be waiting here to walk in with you and complete that journey together." Shabbat Shalom.